Marcus, you need to drink this. Trust us. The words echoed in Marcus Vale's mind as darkness swallowed him whole. 5 voices. 5 people he'd known since childhood. 5 hands forcing the glass to his lips as the African sunset bled crimson across the horizon. Now, consciousness crept back like a thief, bringing with it the metallic taste of betrayal and the suffocating reality of rope burns cutting into his wrists. His eyes snapped open to a nightmare painted in dawn's cruel light, an endless sea of thorn trees stretching in every direction, the air thick with the scent of wild earth and something else. Something predatory. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Are you team I'd survive this or team I'm already panicking? And also make sure to subscribe to our channel for our basic heartwarming stories. Marcus Vale wasn't supposed to end up here. The self-made billionaire, the man who'd clawed his way from a roach-infested apartment in Detroit to penthouses in Dubai, the underdog who'd conquered Wall Street. He wasn't supposed to die like an animal in the African bush. But here he was, bound and bleeding, abandoned in the Mkomazi Reserve, a restricted zone where tourists never ventured because the predators here still remembered what it meant to hunt humans. 12 hours earlier, everything had been champagne and laughter. The exclusive Serengeti Sky Resort, where rooms cost more than most people earn in a year, had been Marcus's choice for his 45th birthday. Not because he needed luxury. God knows he'd had enough of that, but because he wanted to celebrate with the only people who remembered him when he was nobody. Derek, his college roommate who'd lent him $50 for his first business registration. Jennifer, who'd believed in his tech startup when venture capitalists laughed him out of boardrooms. Marcus, Tony, and Rashid, the crew from his neighborhood who'd sworn they'd all make it out together, who'd promised that success wouldn't change them. Success didn't change them. It revealed them. To Marcus. Derek had raised his glass as the sun melted into the savannah. The only one of us who actually made something of himself. The words had stung, but Marcus had laughed it off. He'd missed the edge in Derek's voice, the way Jennifer's smile never reached her eyes, the hungry desperation radiating from his friends like heat from asphalt. He'd been too busy being grateful, too busy trying to hold on to the past to see what they'd become, or what they'd always been. The private safari vehicle had left the main trails, winding deeper into wilderness. Special route, Tony had winked. Birthday surprise. The champagne had tasted slightly bitter, but Marcus had assumed it was just expensive and acquired. When his vision started swimming, when the world tilted and voices became echoes, he'd thought altitude sickness, heat, exhaustion, never betrayal, never murder. Now, struggling against ropes a bit deeper with every movement, Marcus understood with crystalline clarity. His friends were broke. He'd seen the designer suits that didn't quite fit anymore, the watches that were excellent fakes, the desperate way they'd asked about his latest investments. While he'd built an empire, they'd lost everything chasing the same dream. And his life insurance policy, the one that named them all as beneficiaries from back when they were young and invincible and stupid, was worth $50 million. More than enough to solve all their problems. All they needed was for Marcus to die somewhere his body would never be found. A sound froze his blood. Low, rumbling, coming from the acacia thicket 30 feet away. Breathing. Not human breathing. Something bigger. Something that saw him not as Marcus Vale, billionaire entrepreneur, philanthropist, and self-made legend, but as meat, as prey, as a natural order reasserting itself over a man who'd forgotten he was just another animal who could bleed. Marcus's hands were still partially bound, but adrenaline gave him strength. He rolled onto his side, ignoring the thorns tearing his custom safari jacket. $1,500, now just expensive rags. His fingers found a sharp rock. He began sawing at the rope, each movement sending waves of agony through his wrists, each second feeling like an hour as that breathing grew closer. Closer, closer. The thorns parted. And Marcus Vale, the man who'd faced down hostile boardrooms and corporate sharks, who'd negotiated billion-dollar deals without flinching, who'd stared down poverty and emerged victorious, found himself looking into the amber eyes of a predator that didn't care about his net worth. A male lion, massive, scarred, old but powerful, with a dark manner that seemed to absorb the morning light. The king of this domain, and Marcus was trespassing in his kingdom. The lion's lips pulled back, revealing teeth designed by millions of years of evolution for one purpose: Killing. Marcus's rope snapped free. The lion tensed, muscles coiling beneath tawny fur. And as Marcus scrambled backward, his mind racing through every nature documentary he'd ever half-watched, every survival article he'd never thought he'd need, one thought crystallized with perfect, terrible clarity. His friends had known exactly what they were doing. They'd left him in lion territory. They'd made sure his death would look like a tragic accident. A foolish billionaire who'd wandered drunk from his resort. Just another stupid tourist who'd learned too late that nature doesn't accept credit cards. The lion took a step forward. Marcus's back hit a tree. There was nowhere left to run. What happens next will leave you speechless. But first, could you survive this? Drop your answer below. The lion didn't attack. That's what would haunt Marcus later, in those moments between waking and sleeping when trauma replays its greatest hits. The lion just watched, studied him with an intelligence that felt almost human, almost judgmental, as if weighing whether this pathetic creature was worth the effort of killing. Then it turned and melted back into the bush, leaving Marcus gasping, shaking, alive but utterly, completely lost. The first day was confusion. Marcus stumbled through thorn trees and dried riverbeds, using the sun as a compass the way he'd read about in some survival blog years ago. North. He needed to go north. Or was it south? The Serengeti Sky Resort had been north of the reserve. Or south. Good. Why hadn't he paid attention during the drive-in? Because he'd been too busy laughing with the people who were killing him, too busy being nostalgic to notice he was being driven to his execution. His throat was sandpaper. His lips cracked and bled. The $50,000 Rolex on his wrist, a monument to his success, a symbol of how far he'd come, was utterly useless. Time didn't matter here. Only survival mattered, and Marcus Vale, master of the universe, was failing at the most basic human task, staying alive. By late afternoon, the hallucination started. His mother appeared, walking beside him through the thorns, shaking her head with that disappointed look he remembered from childhood. I told you, baby, I told you never forget where you came from. Never trust success. It makes people show you who they really are. You died 10 years ago, Mama, Marcus whispered to the ghost. And you're about to join me if you don't find water, she replied, then vanished into heat shimmer. He found a watering hole as the sun began its descent, a muddy depression where animals had clearly drunk, tracks everywhere, elephant, zebra, and the massive paw prints that made his heart stutter. Lion, multiple lions. This was their territory, their restaurant, their killing ground. But Marcus was dying of thirst. He lay on his stomach and drank the brackish water, each gulp a prayer and a gamble. Dysentery or dehydration, pick your poison. At least dysentery took a few days. That's when he heard them. Voices. Human voices. Marcus stumbled toward the sound, hope exploding in his chest like fireworks. Rescue. Someone had come looking. But as he crashed through a thicket, the voices resolved into something that made him duck behind a termite mound, his heart sinking into his expensive Italian shoes. His satellite phone, Derek, explaining to someone how they'd searched everywhere, how Marcus had been drinking heavily, how he'd wandered off and they'd tried to stop him. The performance was Oscar-worthy. Jennifer was crying in the background, her sobs perfectly calibrated for maximum sympathy. They were back at the resort, building their alibi, making sure that when his body was eventually found, if it was ever found, they'd be devastated friends, not murderers. And they'd walk away $50 million richer, split 5 ways. Marcus wanted to scream, to rage, to somehow reach through that phone and make them pay. But he was too weak, too broken, too busy dying in this godforsaken wilderness while they sipped cocktails and played grieving. Night fell like a hammer. The African night isn't like city darkness, where light pollution turns everything gray. This was primordial black, the kind of darkness humans evolved to fear, when nighttime meant predators and death. Marcus climbed into the lower branches of an acacia tree, ignoring the thorns, ignoring everything except the need to be off the ground when the hunters emerged. The sound started around midnight. Whooping laughter that wasn't laughter at all. Hyenas, dozens of them, their clan passing beneath his tree. Then the roar, deep, resonant, a sound that vibrated in your chest and reminded you that humans had only recently stopped being prey. The lion, his lion. Marcus didn't know why he thought of it that way, But somewhere in his fever-addled brain, he claimed ownership of his almost executioner. Morning brought no mercy. His second day started with the realization that he'd wet himself during the night, fear and dehydration mixing into humiliation. Marcus Vale, who'd been profiled in Forbes, who'd rung the bell at the New York Stock Exchange, who'd shaken hands with presidents, reduced to an animal clinging to a tree, covered in his own waste. He climbed down, fell, couldn't get up for 20 minutes. This was how he was going to die. Not from lions, from exposure, from dehydration, from the simple biological fact that humans weren't designed for this, and all his money couldn't buy him water in a wilderness that didn't accept any currency except strength. But then he saw her, a young woman in park ranger khakis, maybe 25, examining the ground near where Marcus had been abandoned. She was following tire tracks, he realized, looking for something, looking for evidence. Marcus tried to call out, but his voice was gone, replaced by a pathetic croak. He stumbled toward her, but she was too far away, and before he could close the distance, her radio crackled and she moved off, disappearing into the bush. Someone was looking. Someone suspected. The hope was worse than despair. Hope made you fight when surrender would be easier. Hope was torture. By the third day, Marcus had stopped being human. He was just biology, just a collection of systems failing one by one. He couldn't remember his portfolio, couldn't recall his company's stock price, couldn't even picture the faces of the people who'd betrayed him. There was only thirst, only the relentless sun, only the growing certainty that this is where Marcus Vale's story would end, not in a hospital bed surrounded by people he'd thought were friends, but alone in the date, food for scavengers. He collapsed near the same watering hole, too weak to drink, too weak to move, too weak to care when he heard the footsteps approaching. Heavy footsteps, padded paws on hard earth. The lion had returned. This time, Marcus didn't run, couldn't run. He just lay there, watching through half-closed eyes as a massive cat approached. At least it would be quick, he thought. At least it would be over. But the lion didn't attack. Instead, it roared, a sound so loud, so primal, that Marcus felt it in his bones. And then he understood. The lion wasn't roaring at him. It was roaring at the pack of hyenas that had been circling, drawn by the scent of dying prey. The lion stood over Marcus's body like a guard, like a protector, driving away the scavengers with slashing claws and snapping jaws. When the hyenas fled, the lion looked down at Marcus one more time. And in those amber eyes, Marcus could have sworn he saw recognition? Impossible. Insane. The delusions of a dying brain. The lion disappeared into the bush. Marcus passed out, certain he was hallucinating his own rescue. You won't believe what happens next. What this lion does will shock you to your core. The smell of blood woke Marcus. Not his blood. At least, he didn't think so. Everything hurt too much to tell anymore. His body had become a map of agony, each nerve ending screaming its own unique frequency of pain. But his eyes cracked open to a sight that made no sense in any reality he understood. An impala carcass. Fresh, still warm, dragged to within 3 feet of where he lay dying. And the lion, his lion, sitting 20 feet away, watching him with those impossible amber eyes. Marcus's brain stuttered, trying to process what he was seeing. Lions didn't do this. Predators didn't feed prey. This violated every nature documentary, every survival instinct, every law of the wild. Yet here it was, undeniable and real. A lion had killed for him, had brought him food. Why? The question echoed through his fever-broken mind as Marcus crawled toward the carcass. He should have been afraid. The lion could end him with one swipe of those massive paws, but fear required energy he no longer had. There was only survival now, only the animal imperative to eat or die. His hands found raw meat. His civilized mind recoiled, but his body didn't care about medium rare or food poisoning or the fact that Marcus Vale didn't eat anything that wasn't prepared by a Michelin-starred chef. He ate, tore at the flesh with teeth that had never done this before, swallowing chunks his stomach would probably reject, but getting moisture, getting protein, getting life. The lion watched, didn't approach, didn't attack, just watched. When Marcus had eaten enough to think semi-clearly, when some terrible clarity returned to his oxygen-starved brain, he really looked at the lion for the first time. Old, battle-scarred.
We can find another way. This doesn't have to end in violence.
A torn left ear, a limp in the right foreleg. This was a king past his prime, probably driven from his pride by younger males, surviving alone in this restricted territory where tourists never came. An outcast, like Marcus had been before success found him. Like Marcus was again now. As Marcus stayed, something caught the morning light. Something that didn't belong on a wild animal. The lion shifted position, and Marcus saw it clearly. A collar, faded, old, buried deep in the massive mane, but definitely a collar with a metal tag. Impossible. Marcus dragged himself closer, each movement agony, each into lifetime. The lion remained still, as if understanding, as if permitting this proximity. And when Marcus was close enough to touch that scarred head, close enough to see the tag, his world stopped. Engraved in scratched metal, barely legible, Simba MV Foundation Wildlife Rescue, 2008. MV Marcusvale. The memory hit him like a physical blow. 15 years ago. His first major success, his first tech company going public. He'd been 29, suddenly wealthy beyond imagination, and drowning in the guilt that comes with success when you've left everyone you love behind. His mother had just died. He'd been alone in a world that suddenly wanted to be his friend. A wildlife documentary. Lions orphaned by poachers. A rescue organization desperate for funding. Marcus, drunk on grief and money, had written a check for $500,000, had funded the entire program. Forgotten about it the next day because billionaires do charity the way normal people buy coffee, frequently and without much thought. But they'd sent him photos. Cubs saved from certain death. One of them with a distinctive torn ear, injured by the trap that killed its mother. They'd named it Simba, generic, tourist-friendly, but Marcus remembered thinking the little cub looked more dignified than that. Looked like a survivor. Looked like him. "You remember," Marcus whispered, his voice broken, his hand reaching toward the lion's massive head. "You remember me." The lion didn't move away. Leaned into the touch, actually, like a house cat seeking affection. And Marcusvale, the self-made billionaire, the master of the universe, the man who never cried because crying was weakness and weakness was death in his world, shattered. He wept. Great, gasping sob that hurt his dehydrated body, that tore from his chest like something living trying to escape. He wept for his mother who'd warned him about false friends. He wept for the boy he'd been, who'd trusted too easily. He wept for the man he'd become, who'd forgotten where he came from. And he wept because this animal, this wild, dangerous predator, had shown him more loyalty than the people he'd loved. The lion let him cry. Let him press his face into that dark mane. Let him hold on to something real in a world that had revealed itself as counterfeit. "You became a king," Marcus said through tears. "We both did. We both survived. But you didn't forget. You didn't become something else." That's when he heard it. The helicopter. The sound of rotors cutting through African sky. The lion's head snapped up, ears forward. He moved away from Marcus, alert now, every muscle tensed. Helicopters meant humans, and humans meant danger, even for apex predators who remembered kindness. No, Marcus grabbed at air, trying to hold on to the one thing in this world that had proven true. "Don't go. Please." But the lion was already moving, melting into the thorns and shadows like he'd never been there at all. And Marcus was alone again, lying in the dirt next to an impala carcass, when the helicopter's shadow crossed over him. The young ranger, Amora, he'd later learn her name was Amora, jumped from the helicopter before it fully landed. She was on her radio, calling for emergency medical, her voice urgent but controlled. Professional. But when she reached Marcus, when she saw what he was lying next to, her professionalism cracked. "What? How are you alive? What happened?" Marcus tried to speak, but his voice was gone. He managed to point toward where the lion had disappeared. Amora followed his gesture, saw the tracks, and her face went pale. "You've been lying here? In lion territory? For 3 days." Marcus nodded. "That's impossible. The lions here are dangerous. They are not habituated to humans. They would have—" She trailed off, looking at the impala carcass, at Marcus's hand still reaching toward the empty bush where the lion had vanished, at the deep paw prints in the earth circling his position like a protective perimeter. Understanding dawned in her eyes. Impossible understanding. The kind that would sound insane if you said it out loud. It protected you, she whispered. A lion protected you. Behind them, more rangers were arriving, medical supplies being unloaded. But Amora stayed frozen, looking between Marcus and the wilderness, trying to reconcile what the evidence showed with what she knew to be true about predator behavior. Marcus found his voice. It came out as barely a whisper, but it was there. He knew me. Years ago. He saved. The words didn't make sense, even to him. But they didn't need to, because as a medical team reached them, as they began loading Marcus onto a stretcher, he saw it. The lion, watching from a distance, half hidden in the acacia shadows, still protecting, still guarding, still loyal in a way no human in Marcus's life had ever been. Their eyes met across the clearing. Man and beast, underdog and king, both survivors, both alone, both remembering a debt paid in full. Then the lion turned and disappeared into his kingdom, and Marcus Vale passed out, finally safe, finally saved, finally understanding what true loyalty looked like, and it had a torn ear and a faded collar and eyes that had seen him not as a billionaire, but as a man who'd given a dying cub a second chance at life. The rescue was just the beginning. What happened next revealed a betrayal that went deeper than Marcus could have imagined. Drop a like if the story is giving you chills. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and broken dreams. Marcus Vale lay in the private suite of Nairobi General, tubes running from his arms, monitors beeping their monotonous rhythm of survival. He was alive, medically speaking, miraculously so. Severe dehydration, multiple lacerations, early-stage kidney failure, borderline sepsis from infected wounds. The doctors said another 12 hours and they'd have been planning a funeral instead of a recovery. But Marcus didn't feel alive. He felt hollowed out, like someone had reached inside and scooped out everything that made him Marcus and left behind just meat and bones and the terrible knowledge of what people he loved were capable of. The arrest had happened fast. Amora, the young ranger who'd saved him, had been suspicious from the beginning. Rich tourists didn't just wander off drunk into restricted zones. Not unless someone led them there. She'd followed tire tracks, documented GPS coordinates, and when Marcus was rescued, barely conscious but insistent, repeating 5 names over and over like a prayer or a curse, she'd known. The police found everything. Text messages between Derek and Jennifer, discussing the life insurance payout. Tony's burner phone with searches for how long does it take to die of dehydration. Rashid's detailed map of the restricted zones, marked with lion territory. Marcus's friends hadn't just betrayed him. They planned it meticulously, coldly, with a kind of attention to detail that should have been admirable if it wasn't so monstrous. They were arrested within 48 hours of Marcus's rescue. All 5 of them. Attempted murder. Conspiracy. Kidnapping. The media had a field day. Billionaire's friends plot his death for insurance money screamed headlines worldwide. His face was everywhere, not as a success story anymore, but as a cautionary tale about trust and jealousy and what wealth does to people. Marcus refused all visitors for the first week. The doctors worried about his mental state more than his physical recovery. Depression, they said. Trauma. PTSD. All clinical terms for what Marcus actually felt. Utterly, completely alone in a world where the only creature who'd shown him loyalty had 4 legs and a manner. On day 8, Amara came anyway. The nurses tried to stop her, but she had that particular kind of stubborn determination that Marcus recognized in himself, or in who he used to be. "You shouldn't be alone," she said, sitting in the chair beside his bed without asking permission. She was young, maybe 26, with intelligent eyes that had seen too much of what humans were capable of doing to each other and to the wild. "I've been alone my whole life," Marcus replied, his voice still rough from dehydration damage. "I just didn't know it until now." Amora pulled out a tablet and, without preamble, showed him footage. Camera trap images, grainy but unmistakable. The lion, his lion, circling Marcus's unconscious body, driving away hyenas, dragging the impala kill. The timestamp showed 3 full days of protection, of a wild predator acting against every instinct to guard a human. "This shouldn't be possible," Amora said quietly. "I've studied lion behavior for 6 years. They don't do this. They don't protect humans. They don't share kills. They don't remember." Marcus stared at the images, his throat tight. But he did. He did. Amora swiped to another image, a close-up of the lion's collar, captured by a different camera. I looked up the MV Foundation. Your foundation. The one you funded back in 2008. That program saved 43 lions. Simba was cub number 7, the one with a torn ear from a poacher's trap. I didn't even remember, Marcus whispered. I wrote a check and forgot about it. It was just money, just another tax write-off. But he remembered you. Amora leaned forward, her voice intense. We think lions may recognize individual human scents for years, maybe decades. When the program released him, they kept detailed records. You visited the sanctuary once, during the release ceremony. You held him, for maybe 5 minutes. 15 years ago. 5 minutes. One random act of kindness that Marcus hadn't even thought was kind, just something rich people did, and it had saved his life. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent millions on his friends over the years, bailing Derek out of bad investments, funding Jennifer's failed businesses, supporting Tony and Rashid through every scheme and dream they'd had. Millions of dollars trying to hold on to people who were planning his murder. But 500,000 in 5 minutes with a lion cub had earned him loyalty that transcended species. What happens to them? Marcus asked. My friends. Ex-friends, Amora corrected gently. They are facing 25 to life each. Their lawyers are trying to negotiate plea deals, claiming temporary insanity, financial desperation. They want you to testify on their behalf, to show mercy. Marcus laughed, a bitter sound that hurt his healing throat. Mercy. They drugged me, tied me up, and left me to die. And they want mercy. It's your choice, Amora said. But before you decide, there's something else you should know. Simba, your lion, is dying. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. What? He's old. Maybe 17, 18 years. That's ancient for a wild male lion. And is alone, expelled from his pride years ago. His starving, Marcus, that impala he killed for you, that was probably one of his last successful hunts. His teeth are broken. His left hip is damaged. We've been monitoring him for months, trying to decide if we should intervene, but... She trailed off. But is wild, Marcus finished. And wild things die alone. Yes. Amora stood up, preparing to leave. I thought you should know. He saved you, but no one can save him. That's just nature. After she left, Marcus lay in the dark hospital room, watching the monitors trace his heartbeat in green lines across screens. His lawyers were calling constantly. His business partners needed decisions. The media wanted statements. His ex-friends wanted forgiveness. The world wanted Marcus Vale to go back to being who he was, the billionaire, the success story, the self-made man who conquered everything. But Marcus didn't want to go back. He wanted something else entirely. Something he'd lost somewhere along the way from poverty to penthouse. Something a dying lion in the African wilderness understood better than any human he'd ever known. He wanted to matter, not his money, not his success, not his empire or his portfolio or his net worth. Just him, Marcus, the boy his mother had raised, the man who'd once cared about things bigger than profit margins. What Marcus decides next will change everything, not just for him, but for the lion who saved him. But first, I need to tell you what his friends did when they heard about his decision. 6 months later, Marcus stood at the edge of the Mkomazi Reserve at dawn, watching the sun paint the African sky in shades of gold and crimson that no amount of money could buy. He lived here now, not in the luxury resort where his almost murder had been planned, but in a modest research station he'd built from the ground up. 3 rooms, solar panels, a water filtration system, and a porch that overlooked the wilderness where he'd almost died and been reborn. The billionaire was gone, or rather, the billionaire had been redistributed. Marcus had liquidated 70% of his assets, sold companies, divested stocks, dismantled the empire he'd spent 2 decades building. The money had gone into the MV Foundation, now the largest wildlife conservation fund in East Africa. 3 million acres of protected land, hundreds of rangers employed, anti-poaching units, educational programs, veterinary services. It was the best investment Marcus Vale had ever made, and it wouldn't earn him a single dollar in return. Amora emerged from the research station, 2 cups of coffee in hand. She'd become his partner in this new venture, teaching him about conservation while he funded the work she'd always dreamed of doing. They weren't romantic, but there was something deeper, 2 people who'd chosen purpose over comfort. The morning patrol radioed in. She said, handing him a cup. "Is it the watering hole? Same place as yesterday." Marcus nodded, his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't name. "How long?" "Days. Maybe a week." Amora's voice was gentle but honest. She never lied to him, and he loved her for that. His ready Marcus. His lived longer than most wild males. His had a good life. "He saved mine," Marcus said quietly. "I should be able to save his." "You did save his. 15 years ago. You gave him a second chance when he was dying cub. Now he's dying an old king. That's all any of us can ask for, to live long enough to grow old." They drove out together in the patrol vehicle, across land that Marcus now protected, past herds of zebra and elephants that no longer had to fear poachers because Marcus's foundation had made it unprofitable to kill them. The world was still broken, still filled with people who do terrible things for money, but this corner of it, this small piece of wilderness, was safe. Simba was exactly where the rangers had reported, lying in the shade of an acacia tree, his massive body thin now, ribs showing through once magnificent fur. The torn ear still distinctive. The collar, which veterinary teams had tried to remove multiple times, remained. Simba wouldn't let anyone close enough except Marcus. When Marcus approached, the old lion's eyes opened. Still amber, still intelligent, still holding that same recognition that had saved Marcus's life. "Hey, old man," Marcus said softly, settling onto the ground beside the dying predator. Amora stayed back, giving them space. This goodbye was private. Simba's tail twitched once, a feline acknowledgement. "I learned something from you," Marcus continued, his hand resting on the lion's head, feeling the labored breathing. "About loyalty, about what matters. My whole life, I thought success meant money and power and people wanting to be near me. But those people tried to kill me. And you, a wild animal who owed me nothing, you saved me." The lion's breathing was shallow now. Each exhale seemed harder than the last. "I'm not going back to that world," Marcus whispered. "I'm staying here. I'm protecting this place, these animals, your home, your legacy. That's my purpose now. You taught me that. You and my mama, you both tried to tell me the same thing. Don't forget where you came from. Don't let success make you into something you're not." Simba's eyes closed. His breathing slowed. And Marcus sat there as the sun rose higher, as the African heat began its daily assault, as the king of this small wilderness took his last breath with a human who'd once saved him bearing witness. When it was over, when the magnificent body was still, Marcus didn't move for a long time. He just sat there, one hand on the lion's menere, crying for the second time in 6 months. Not tears of despair this time, but of gratitude. The trial happened without Marcus's testimony. He decided not to show mercy to his ex-friends, but not out of vengeance, out of clarity. They'd made their choice. They'd valued money over life, greed over friendship. The consequences were theirs to bear. All 5 received sentences ranging from 15 to 25 years. They'd served them working in prison conservation programs Marcus had funded. If they wanted forgiveness, they could earn it by protecting the things they'd once been willing to destroy. Marcus never visited them. Never wrote, never looked back. He moved forward instead, into a life that looked nothing like the one he'd built and everything like the one he was meant to live. He worked with rangers, tracked animal populations, sat in on anti-poaching strategy meetings, and learned that being rich wasn't about how much you had, it was about how much you could give. Simba was buried on a hill overlooking the watering hole, with a monument that read simply, "A king who remembered." Tourists sometimes visited, drawn by the viral story of the billionaire and the lion. Marcus let them come. Let them take photos. Let them ask questions. Because maybe, just maybe, someone else would learn the lesson before they needed a lion to teach them. Success changes people, but it doesn't have to destroy them. Money reveals character. It doesn't create it. And sometimes the truest loyalty comes from the places you least expect. From a dying cub you saved without thinking. From a life you changed without knowing. From kindness you gave without keeping score. Marcus Vale had been an underdog twice in his life. Once on the streets of Detroit, clawing his way to success. And once in the African wilderness, reduced to prey, saved by a predator who remembered 5 minutes of compassion from 15 years ago. The second time taught him what the first never could. Being a king isn't about power or wealth or people fearing you. It's about protecting what matters. It's about loyalty. It's about remembering where you came from and who helped you get where you are. It's about being the person a lion would risk everything to save. True wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in loyalty, purpose, and the lives you touch. Marcus forgot this lesson and nearly died for it. But a lion with a torn ear and a faded collar remembered what Marcus had forgotten. One act of genuine kindness is worth more than a lifetime of transactions. Success will reveal who your real friends are, but character determines who you'll be when everything else is stripped away. The underdog who becomes a king faces a choice. Stay true to who you were, or become what the crown makes you. Choose wisely. Your life may depend on it. If this story moved you, if it made you think about loyalty, success, and what really matters in life, then do me a favor. Subscribe to Billionaire Dawn Stories. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because every week I bring you stories about wealth, power, betrayal, and the lessons that change everything. These aren't just stories. They're warnings, lessons, and sometimes they're second chances you didn't know you needed. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have forgiven Marcus's friends? Are you Team Mercy or Team Justice? And what's the most loyal thing anyone has ever done for you? Let's talk about it in the comments. Subscribe to Billionaire Dawn Stories, where every story teaches you something money can't buy. See you in the next one.